there, Carl.
Greetings, Michael Kitces. How's it going?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. How are you?
Things are good. Yeah, look, normally I'm excited about snow, but it feels like I just put the skis away. So I'm not particularly excited, but it is snowing. It's snowing in Utah. That's good news, I guess.
Well, I think that's how Utah works. My understanding, at least. I'm like a native East Coaster. I read in a book somewhere that apparently like snow in Utah, especially when you choose to live in the mountains, is like a thing.
Good. It's like Utah's doing Park City's doing Park City things.
Okay, so it's
Yes.
doing what it's supposed to do. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Just a little. It just feels like anyway. It's good. It's good.
So I want to hear. My understanding now, because there's some people that think we like are in constant like daily connection of going what's going on in each other's worlds, and in practice like I really only get to catch up with you when we sit down like once a month to record these.
Right.
So as I say, like you've got a new project, and when you do new projects you tend to do neat things because having known you for many years, your new project, like, yeah, I have a new project. It's going to be a column in the New York Times, and then you wrote it for like 7 years. Or like, I have a new project. I'm leaving the continent and I'll be back from 4 years. So your like new projects tend to be really, really interesting. So as I understand it,
Uh,
you have a new project. So
right.
I would like to understand what the new Carl project is. Because if it's anything like your prior project, this is probably gonna be a thing for a while. So what's your new project?
Well, first of all, that's really humbling and flattering. Like I don't Yeah, I mean, I guess like I do treat all of these things. I do think of I started probably 15 years ago because I heard Seth Godin say it, that he treated his life as a series of projects and each one takes a couple of years. So he like, at one point he was like, I think I have like 10 more projects left. And I love that idea of like thinking of life as a series of projects, almost like the way you would if you made movies. Like you're going to get a
Yeah.
team together, you're going to do a thing, and it doesn't have to go forever. In fact, you and I talked about this. I think I agreed to do 50 episodes, and you
And
stopped
then
telling me
yeah.
what episode number what episode number we were on.
And then and then we got to 50 and you said you would stick around to 100. And now I just don't talk about what episode we're number on at
Yeah.
all ever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I love things that have a starting point at any point, and that's the way I think of projects. So this latest one, and again, like this would be fun to chat a bit about because I get asked this question all the time, like how do you kind of do those things, and as if there were some sort of grand plan, and there never has been. So I was in New Zealand, and I got an email from some folks in Los Angeles, and they said, "Hey, we've done this show, Big Bang Theory, for years." And this is Dave Gesh,
I've
and
I've heard of that. Being like fairly ignorant of anything pop culture, I actually do know what Big Bang Theory is. Okay.
yeah, and he was like, "Look, we want to do for Big Bang Theory. We want to do for money what Big Bang Theory did for physics. We would like to do a TV show that does it for money." So we started talking about concepts, and we spent
And
years.
I got to even pause here. It's like, and I don't mean this in a negative way to you at all, but like,
Yeah,
why did he email you about this? Like, how does
believe
that
me,
email come about? That like the producer of Big Bang Theory is like, hey, I think I'm gonna send an email to Carl Richards.
yeah, believe me.
How
I
does
asked
that
the same.
connection
It
happen?
was the same way. Like I asked the same question about Ron Lieber. Asking like, "Hey, I love these sketches. Would you do?" I think it. I think the only thing I have. This is part of the like thing I'm uncomfortable with. The only thing I have to offer there, because it like is, I guess, because I was playing in traffic. What he said was, "You talk about money in a way that we don't. Nobody else does," is what he said.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But I asked the same question. I'm just like, how did that happen? I don't know. There's a mystery to it. After all the like, I play in traffic and I work to increase my luck surface area. Like after all that stuff, there's still a giant pile of mystery that I just described. Like I'm a huge fan of luck, like bald faced, just luck. So anyway, Dave says this. I'm trying to fast forward a bit. Dave says this. We work for like 2 or 3 years on ideas, and with his partner Rebecca, who's become a partner of mine, like just great people. We work on all these ideas for a TV show. And we land on one that we're quite excited about and we think will happen sometime in the future. And in the middle of pitching it somewhere, somebody from Magnolia Network, which is Chip and Joanna Gaines' company, they're started the whole fixer upper, the entire like genre really, heard the pitch and said, we really love that. What do you think about starting it as a podcast? And the idea was like secretly, and it wasn't super secret, but I just wanted to show the world what it was like to have a conversation with a real financial planner, right? What a really good first meeting would feel like. Now, there's a little more to it than that, but that's largely like, what does it mean? And I have these conversations with people all the time, unrelated to work, right? Like sitting around a fire at a coffee shop. Like my favorite entry point into somebody's life is their use of capital, time, money, energy, and attention. So like, if I get to meet somebody that I feel like likes those kind of conversations, like I met this person named Jessica the other day, and I was like, tell me a little bit about how do you spend, like, what was your earliest memory of money? Like, that's my, like, I call me crazy, but that I was doing that anyway. So Magnolia was like, yeah, we would love, the folks at Magnolia, Chip and Joanna Gaines were like, yeah, we'd love to do that. And so we've been working on it for over a year now. Like we've recorded all these different pilots, all these different tries. So that's how it's called 50 Fires, which is kind of a nod to, in fact, in the third episode, which was one of the ones we recorded first, I talked about this fire pit I'm building in my backyard and my dream of having, and I just had a group of 4 financial advisors actually out the week before, and we'd sat around a fire up in the mountains and talked about this kind of stuff. And so it's kind of a nod to the idea of like sitting around a fire, talking about things that really matter. So that's a little bit of the genesis story.
Okay.
And what the podcast is. So it's out now as we're recording this, the 4th episode, we're releasing weekly. The 4th episode launches tomorrow, and it's Chip Gaines.
Okay. So by the time this episode airs for our recording, you'll probably be another 4 or 5 episodes out because we recorded a month in advance.
Yeah.
So I'm struck by how you frame this. So I wanted to show the world what it was like to have a conversation with a real financial planner. So love that message. I'm sure most of us who are listening love the message.
Right.
But I just help us understand more. Like what's the show? I mean, like, what are you doing? What's the show?
Yeah. So so I'll just walk you through a couple of the episodes. Like one episode ago was Lucas Nelson. So Lucas is an incredibly successful musician in his own right, and he also happens to be the prince, right? Like he's the son of Willie Nelson. And we sat down at a songwriters festival that I got asked to come to for this purpose. I just started, like, I was super curious about what it was like to grow up as Lucas. I wasn't curious what he learned from, like, I'm a huge, like, Willie Nelson. Come on. Like, I grew up with that sort of stuff. Right.
Yeah.
But I didn't really want to know about that. What I wanted to know about, like, was what was life like for Lucas around money? So, and then like this week, I just did the interview a couple of days ago with Chip Gaines. Now, Chip Gaines, we all know, like the, fixer upper, like this celebrity, but nobody's ever had like a real conversation with these people about money because we don't do this. So that the show is, I often start with, in fact, I've got my notes right over there. Like I've got a list of questions, and I worked with some of our favorite financial planner academic folks on working through these questions, but I often start with, what's your earliest memory of money? Which is not an unusual question in the financial, like, life planning / therapy world. And all I'm doing with these early questions is just kind of using them as an opportunity to find the crunchy bits, like the bit where you're like, oh, like that, like you can feel it and see it when something, and those of us, all of our listeners have been in these first meetings where
Oh,
You're
yeah.
having a conversation and somebody's like, oh my, geez, I remember my mom saying, don't be so spoiled. And like, you're tempted to just move on. But in the show, I don't move on. I was like, oh, tell me more about that. All right. So what's your earliest memories? One of my favorite questions is, did you know in junior high, this has been really, really helpful. And this is, by the way, Michael, this is one of the things I'm hoping is that these questions, in fact, we're building like resource guides of every episode for free for advisors to use in their like their content marketing stuff, their education stuff. They can send it out in their newsletters. We're building resource guides, almost like a book club,
Okay.
around each episode. And one of the things we're doing is using these conversation prompts. So one of my favorite questions I've never heard anybody ask was, what socioeconomic class were you in junior high? It's been amazing. I didn't ask like, how did you know? It's like, what socioeconomic class? And people always are like, oh, I was one of the rich kids or I was one of the poor kids. And then my favorite follow-up is, how did you know? Like, Michael, you just told me you were one of the poor kids in junior high. How did you know that? And the stories, like I'll tell you one story, and I can't remember who said this. I think it's one of the episodes that's already out. He was like, yeah, oh man, yeah, well, I was one of the poor kids. I was one of the kids that got lunch, right? Like school lunch. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. In fact, he's like, I said, how did you know that you were one of the poor kids? He's like, well, because I only had one pair of jeans. And I was hanging out with this girl I knew like one of the rich girls. And one day at school, we were playing football afterwards, and I got some grass stains on my jeans. And the next day, I showed up with those jeans on with grass stains on. And this girl was like, you only have one pair of jeans? And she didn't talk to me anymore. Like, that's amazing. Like, and then something that I think Christy Archuleta taught me was give them a chance to make sense of that now. So I said, like, looking back on that experience now, what do you make of that? So much there, right? Like so much there. So that's what the show is. And I've got a whole list of those questions. And I kind of move from, I'm also really curious about like the role of wisdom traditions or religion or spirituality or family. Like, were there any customs or traditions from your family that informed how you used money? That's been fascinating too. We just had Maneet Chauhan, one of the celebrity chefs. She's the judge at Chopped, and she grew up in India. And she told this story about how she saved up enough money. She's like, our family, we didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't know that because everybody else around us didn't have any money. I never got told no because I never asked. She was like, it was incredible. I was like, man, that's a really interesting thing to think about, like who you hang out with. And Instagram has ruined that for all of us. Anyway, she saved up this money and she bought a can of Coke. She's like, a small can, and she was showing me like a small can of Coke. And she's like, because you couldn't get it in India. She was on a trip somewhere. Took it back to India, never opened it, kept it in the closet, and would look at it every once in a while. And you're like, tell me, what does that, like, what do you make of that now? Why is that important to you? Fascinating stuff. So that's what the show is. And then I work my way through life, sort of like tell us a little bit about now, with like Lucas, we took off on songwriting and money with Dean Norris Jr. Dean Norris Jr. is he's Hank in Breaking Bad.
Okay.
With him, he told me money. I love this money. I was like, what does money mean to you? Is one of the questions I asked him. He said, it just means how many months I can go without working. He's like, from the earliest.
Because he lives in a performance world. So it's all like how long can how long can the money last until I have to go get another gig?
It's exactly right. Right. And he was like, from the very earliest, like sleeping on my friends' couches, that was what money. And I was like, how did you come up with that? Like, what? He's like, I just came up with it. I would just take the total amount in my bank account, divide it by amount I spend every month. And I wanted to get that number as high as possible. And I was like, that's incredible. Like the total amount, the number of months I could go without working. Really cool. So that's the kind.
Which is interesting. I mean, there's a version of that's like, well, yeah, that's why we save for retirement, like accumulate enough money that we don't have to work for the last 30 odd years that we're going to be around. But that sounds like he's got a very different frame. I mean, this is a hand-to-hand combat of like getting through each day and week and month of how long until I have to find my next gig.
Yeah. And there was and so you like when that comes up in a show, like I would think would happen, at least the way it happened to me in a first meeting. If I had a client who said something like that in the first meeting, I wouldn't just go, okay, cool, write it down and move on. I would want to tell me more about that. That sounds like that was an important discovery to you. Like, how isn't that interesting that you is like, well, yeah, because I'm generally pretty conservative. I'm like, whoa, you're conservative and like generally risk averse. And you chose to be an actor and move to LA? Like, how do you circle that square? And he's like, yeah, I know. That's why the money, how many months? Like, so you're just looking kind of like, I kind of think of it as like really paying attention, which is like, and I think what these people are feeling, because the universe, I get a little emotional about it, to be honest, because the universal thing at the end of these conversations has been thank you. Like that's and what I think they're feeling is the intense presence of somebody who's like really paying attention. So I'm really like looking for the crunchy bit, trying to feel the emotional bit. Like, hey, let's go back a minute ago. Chip Gaines, of all people, used the word insecure 4 or 5 times. Like this is a guy on the top of the world in terms of, like he used the word insecure 4 or 5 times. I mean, you better believe I'm not going to let that go without saying, hey, Chip, you said insecure like 4 or 5. Let's talk about that. What does that mean to you? Why insecure? Would more money solve that? No. What the other work? So we got to talk about like, if you're insecure around money, more money will never solve that problem, Right. And so anyway, that's what the show's about. Sorry for the long-winded answer, but that idea of presence, super valuable.
So now I follow more just the context that you gave this. So, right, ideally, hopefully, from our greedy financial advisor perspective, like people will hear this and say, my advisor doesn't ask me these questions. I want to have conversations like this.
Yeah.
And then hopefully they seek us out, those of us that really do this.
That's exactly right. Like, I don't know if I've really ever said this publicly, but that's like, that was literally the driving factor behind the way I wrote Behavior Gap. Was I didn't want to say, so Nick Murray has taken one approach, which is like hit people over the head with the idea that you need help. And I'm down with that. Cool. It's just not my approach. Has been more of a chess game. And so I wanted it to be self-obvious. If you read Behavior Gap, I wanted it to be self-evident that you would want somebody to help you see blind spots as it relates to your investing, because that's where I was coming from at that point in my career. And now I'm simply thinking of this as like, can we just show the world? And it doesn't have to be an advisor, by the way, but can we show the world what it would look like to have a conversation with your spouse about it? Kids, this is crazy. I realized after we've probably done like 30 interviews. We've only got like 8 of those. There was a bunch just trying different concepts.
Right.
But I realized after 25 of them, I was like, oh my gosh, I haven't asked my wife, Corey, half these. I don't know the answer. So on a road trip a little while ago, we were going down to the desert of southern Utah. I was like, I just waited till there's a little pause in whatever we were listening to, and I asked her, like, what was your earliest memory of money? It was amazing. In fact, the 50 Fires team wants me to interview Corey on Friday, so 4 days from when we're recording.
Wow.
And Corey and I are gonna be episode number 9 or 10, and I can't believe the stuff I didn't know. Like, I've been telling this story that Corey grew up in a family. Her dad was a property developer, a real estate developer, and that she was very comfortable with easy come, easy go, money's no problem. And I was scarcity minded. I told her that I've told that story probably 100 times at speaking engagements. And she was like, what are you talking about? That's not at all the way it was. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. So can we show people, can we demonstrate what it's like to have a conversation about money, period? Can we demonstrate what it's like to be guided through the conversation? Like, I have a big goal. I want 1 million conversations about money happening a month as a result of the podcast. That's the big goal. Because if we do that, like, what do we have now? the Financial Pornography Network? Is that like our model for how to have conversation? I mean, Ramsey, like, bless him for all the work he does, but like we need in the world, we need to be able to go, yeah, that's the goal.
So what's it like having money conversations with high profile people who candidly, like, I'm assuming already have a financial advisor, quote,
right.
financial advisor. They're probably at a level of financial complexity that most of them have engaged support.
Reasonable assumption. Yeah, first of all, like this conversation has nothing to do, like, I've never asked anybody, net worth, balance sheet, how much money do you have in the bank? Like, there's never a number thrown around unless they throw it around. So it's very different that way. But
because you're really getting at like underlying money stories, essentially.
Yeah, like meaning and money, like what does it really mean? And like if somebody brings up like, oh, like Manit said that her dad kept these journals of every penny that every single person in the family spent. Like when they came home, they had to tell him, and he'd write in these journals. I was like, do you still have those? Like where? So we talked a little bit about budgeting. Like that would be like a tangential, like, oh, hey, let's talk a little bit about that. But it's not about that. It's about, so there's two things to think about with that question. One is, what's it like to have conversation? I'm scared to death before these meet. Like Lucas Nelson, I was like, and then Chip, I was scared to death. Manit, like all of them. A guy named Matt Higgins, who's a shark on the Shark Tank. Like Dean Norris, come on, Hank. So scared to death until I realized this is so universal. Like at this level, not the how much money do you have level, but the like, what does it mean to you? The struggle is so universal that I finally have settled into the idea of like, it'll take me a few minutes to get them to realize like, this isn't normal. Like, I'm not going to ask you about how much money you spent last month or pitch you on an investment. Like, I'm just going to really try to pretend like you and I are sitting in your favorite coffee shop. And so finally, when I realized that, I was like, man, I sort of was like, I know how to do this. Like I've been doing this for so long. I know how to have these conversations. But what's interesting from their perspective, and I don't pitch financial advisors or financial planners. I'm just trying to show, because you and I've talked about this before. I don't know how to tell people the benefit of what a real planner does. I'm trying to show them. And I'm not even hinting that it means real planners, you have to go this deep. Like, I'm just saying, like, this is one version of it. And universally, people have been like, oh my gosh, thank you. Like I learned a lot that I didn't even know about myself. So that's been kind of the response around like, like I've never had this experience. Universally, people have not had this experience.
So like, it's just like, take that further for me. So relative to a world where these people all have financial advisors, what are you learning about financial planning, value of an advisor? Like, so I feel like there's some perspective there that you're unlocking around what's valuable and meaningful.
Yeah, all I can say is that I am shocked. And I've been doing this a long time, and I've been having conversations about money for a very long time, sometimes rather public ones, right? And I am shocked still, which is, I can't believe I'm shocked. Like, how could I be, at how universal the struggle is to make sense of all this? Like, and how valuable, how hungry, that was the word I was thinking of earlier, how hungry people are for this. And now they don't know they're hungry for it. This is like this whole trick.
I was going to say, like, because that's right. As at some point, my like business brain starts kicking in. Like, okay, I get all you're saying in the power, but like, will they pay for it? Will people pay for this? Has anyone come out of these meetings like, Carl, do you still do financial planning? Because I want you to be my advisor, because that was an amazing conversation. Like, are these are these cool conversations to have because they're cool conversations to have, which is fine in of itself, or
Yeah.
like, can I do this as an advisor? Do I need to be doing more of this as an advisor for those that are not going to the level of question depth that you're talking about here?
Listen, I think the answer to that question is undoubtedly yes. People will pay for it. That's how I built my business, and if I were to do it again, it is all I would do. The problem is they don't know they want to pay for it.
Right.
So we've talked ad nauseum about this. Like, I think that righteous, I'm using these words very carefully, please, I don't want to be misunderstood. Like, right, I don't want to miscommunicate. Righteous trick, and a righteous trick is always in the service of the client. So it's different than a bait and switch. The righteous trick is to still greet people where, like, they come to you because they've got a presenting problem. You and I have talked about that. One of your favorite questions is, what brought you in today? What's the presenting problem? Hey, performance, my performance. Okay, then, like, we can either say, like, oh, that's stupid, I only talk about deep, meaningful questions. Or we can say, gosh, performance is important to me too. Right. In fact, it's important to our whole firm because it's a part of your overall success. Believe me, we'll get to that. And before we do, would you mind if we back, like, and we back them in, which we've talked about ad nauseum, right? We back them into these more meaningful conversations. So we can't, I have not seen yet. I'm sure there are people who are good at it. And I'm thinking of, like, the hardcore life planning and even financial therapy side of the business. There are people who are good at advertising that and marketing that. I can't figure that out. So what I think the best thing to do is, what do? I'm a financial planner. Oh, and it leads to some discussion. And then I can righteously trick you into, next thing you know, you're crying on my couch, metaphorically.
Or actually.
And I've told people on the show, I've been like, oh yeah, the goal, like, somebody said to me, I didn't know I was going to sit on a couch. I'm like, well, that was my goal when you got here, was somebody was going to cry, and it wasn't going to be me. But I think when after, this is the key. And I think most of us have felt this.
Yeah.
If you sit down with somebody who's been a client of yours for 18 months, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and you were to watch them, and I did this once, hire a journalist or a marketing consultant to go interview your clients that you've had for 3 or 4 years. What's so fascinating is the things they will tell the person about what they value are, I promise it's not going to be the efficient portfolio. They might mention, like, oh, they saved me some money in taxes or whatever, but what they more than likely, what I kept hearing was, Carl knows my kids. You know, I'd feel comfortable if my husband passed away because I take care of all the money. I'd feel comfortable with my husband would feel comfortable with Carl because I right now take care of all the money. My husband doesn't have anything to do with it. But if I was gone, he would feel comfortable because Carl knows him. You know, like, those are the intangible things that are hard to market, which is exactly why I'm doing the show. So I can say, like, here, this is what the thing looks like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So as I'm sort of hearing it, I think it interesting for us advisors to go listen, right? Just there's even a version of actually hearing how Carl works his magic with the client air quotes. They're not your client in that context, but like how those conversations flow in practice, and maybe connecting some clients in who want to explore those conversations further. And I know does the show have some kind of call to action if you want more of these conversations with your financial advisor?
No, we haven't
here and ask.
We're and I don't have a lot of say over where we end up advertising, but we're trying to be preemptive about it and find big RA firms or whatever to be involved in that, just so that we have the right people. But it's largely
please don't let it finish with a like. And if you really like these types of conversations, our salespeople would be happy to have this conversation with you before we sell you bad product here.
Yes. I can't. I'm just waving for those of you who are just listening, I'm waving my hands like, please save me from that. But I don't have a lot of control over it. But the call to action is go have this conversation. So, like, for instance, Bryce Roberts, who is at Bryce on Twitter, he's indie.vc. He's a venture capitalist that does things way differently. Super good guy. He was on, and at the end, I typically end with the question of Bryce's youngest daughter was named Ruby, which is my youngest daughter's name too, which made it cool. Bryce's youngest daughter, as I recall, was 12. So I end with some version of the question where I say, let's pretend like 20 years from now, Ruby's 32. I'm still doing this show, and I have Ruby on as a guest. What would you hope that Ruby would say when I asked her what money meant to her? And like the
Oh,
they're so beautiful. Like that's like my favorite thing. I can't wait till I've done 100 shows and I've got 100 answers to that question because I'm asking it every time. It's just amazing. But in the 50 Fires for Advisor kind of resource guide that we're building, we include those questions. And so the call to action in these shows has typically been like, hey, like in fact, Chips was about statement of financial purpose. I was like, hey, one of the reasons Chip, because I do all these interludes, I interrupt. And this is something I'm really excited about. Like I'll interrupt in the middle of the show in post. So you'll hear me go, the show's going, and then I'll go, hey, Carl here. Did you hear what just happened? And like I might point out like a sunk cost fallacy problem or did you notice that? And I'll say at the end, I say like, hey, take some time this weekend. Like for Chips, it was like, take some time this weekend to write a statement of financial purpose. And if you need help, right, like you could talk to a friend, a mentor, a financial advisor. Like it's the call to action is go have this conversation.
yeah.
So it may be like in one of them, I definitely said in one of them, like, hey, if you haven't asked your spouse or partner what their first memory was of money, and you're a little nervous to talk about money because it's sensitive, like how easy is that one? Go try that one. So we're trying to also build the resource guide for advisors to use those same questions. And we've already had, I don't know, I can't keep track of how many people have already said like, hey, I'm using this as part of my weekly newsletter sort of things.
So the podcast is 50 Fires. Just,
yeah,
I guess, yeah, you're listening to this on a podcast player. So like go to the search tool and enter 50 Fires.
yeah.
So for the resource materials for advisors, where do people find that if they're interested?
Yeah, so it'll be, we don't have, right now I'm just tweeting about it and throwing it up on Instagram, but we will build out a site called 50fires.com.
Okay.
And 50 Fires will have a resource guide for advisors, which is free. Like there's nothing here to buy. Like I just want to have a million I'm thinking of 55. I'm thinking of the podcast as kindling, right? And I didn't mean for there to be so many fire metaphors, but as kindling, and I just want to start a lot of fires. Like, think about that. Like, could there be 1 million conversations each month about money in a way that mattered? And what would the difference be in the world if that was happening? Like, that's what fires me. Oh, geez, I do that. That's what excites me about it. So 50fires.com will have those resource guides at some point.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you, Carl. It's always fascinating to get to watch the journey. This started with the Big Bag producer emailed you while you were in New Zealand to ask a question. So
well, you're too kind. It's been so much fun. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Carl.